So I had an experience when I was 18 years old, and I'm really wondering how common this experience is. And often in speaking, you only want to bring things like this up if you know how the audience is going to react. And I honestly don't know, so don't think there's a right or wrong answer. But still, I want to tell you the experience. So when I was 18, I read this book called Atlas Shrugged. Now, this part probably has some resonance with some of you. And two things struck me about it. One is that the characters in the book were just the coolest people I had ever encountered, as if somebody had taken every cool quality, and I did experience it as cool, of every human being I had encountered or heard about and synthesized them into these individuals. And the second thing was that these characters weren't just cool in terms of their affect or something like that, the way they acted. They had these incredibly powerful ideas. And it just struck me that it made total sense to me that if you had these powerful ideas, which I never heard before, and this level of clarity, which I'd never seen before, then of course you could be like these people, or at least you could achieve really cool things. And that by reading this, I knew that once I started reading this book, I felt like, okay, I'm now going to be more powerful for the rest of my life. Not in terms of power over others, but that my mind will have a power that it wouldn't have had, and this will just give me a tremendous advantage over what I would have otherwise been. And so here's the part, you might be able to relate to that, you might not. Here's then what was a little bit tricky. I had a friend who introduced me to these ideas, or he was one of the main people who motivated me, and he is a very driven person. His name was and is Aaron Patzer, and we became good friends at Duke our freshman year. And he was one of these super driven people that it was very clear he would be very successful. So it's sort of like that fit in with my vision of the books and what the books would do for you. And I remember after my freshman year, I hadn't really known that there was any kind of community in Objectivism. And I didn't know there was an Objectivist conference. And he told me one day, hey, I'm going to the Objectivist conference. I was like, why didn't you tell me about the Objectivist conference? I want to go to the Objectivist conference. So he was the first one of us in 1999 to go to an Objectivist conference. And so I was expecting he'd go to the conference, he'd come back, and he'd meet, like 50 Franciscos, right? And I'd be really jealous and whatever. And what he told me was, well, I went, and it was a little weird because they didn't seem to have quite the same attitude, and their people weren't really as much like leaders and super successful as I would have thought. And that was a bit disheartening. And the next year I had the same feeling. Now there are a couple of people who super impressed me, but I thought there's something off. So I'm just curious if anyone ever had that experience where they had this expectation that I really expect that with these kinds of ideas, everyone's going to be, to put it technically, kicking ass. I'm curious, has anyone had that feeling before? Raise your hand. So, and I think this has definitely improved, but I think it can improve a lot more. So it's improved since 2000 when I started observing this. But I think there are certain reasons that people don't use the philosophy in a way that will enable them to really harness its power. And I think there are certain ways to use it. I know there are. So that's what I want to talk about today. So to continue my story, in 99, I learned about this program that Aaron was at that I couldn't make. And there was a speaker named John Allison. And his talk was called Objectivism, the Competitive Advantage. I'm pretty sure that's word for word what it was. And this was an incredibly successful banker who had taken a small farm bank, at least initially, that became BB&T. He'd taken it from a small farm bank to this nationally known bank. And that title, Objectivism, the Competitive Advantage, that's exactly how I thought about Objectivism from the beginning. And I heard a little bit about his talk, but I didn't get to hear it until years later. But it was why was he one of the few? Why was he one of the few who was just becoming nationally renowned using these ideas and explicitly using these ideas? Because I thought there should be more. And then I heard, there's this teacher named Lisa Van Dam in California who had taught a person who's now a friend of mine named Francisco Laporte and Kira Peikoff, Leonard Peikoff's daughter. And they seemed to be getting amazing results. And I thought, yeah, of course you should be getting amazing results. These ideas are so much better, you should be getting these results. So I knew, I felt affirmation that it's definitely possible to use these ideas in a very powerful way, but I also felt like it's not at all automatic. And so ever since then, I've been really interested in how to use that. And in the last 5 years, in particular, I've had a lot of successes with it. So I think I can speak to both sides of it. So now one thing you might legitimately ask, given the title of this, which is if you look at your handout, how to leverage objectivism to become a leader in your field, you might say, well, is that really a legitimate goal? Because it is a comparative goal of sorts. You're saying like you're a leader compared to others. And if your goal is to be the leader, like the number one, that's a second-handed kind of goal. But what I'm getting at is that I believe that if you have ability and passion and you have the incredible advantage that I believe these ideas give you, you can do a lot of stuff that will stand out. And the way I think of it is this. There's two big issues for me of, I'd say, now being a leader in energy. One is just satisfaction that I feel like I've actually used my mind to its potential, which for a long time I didn't feel like I quite knew how to do. And then the other thing is just opportunity. When you're recognized in a certain field, you have more money and you meet many more interesting people. So in terms of satisfaction, you get to meet the people you always wanted to meet. So just to give you like a little bit of my own arc, because I know some of you have probably never heard of me, I write about energy and environmental issues mostly, and I wrote a book called The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. And from 2004 to 2011, I worked at the Ayn Rand Institute and got a lot of really good training in terms of philosophy and applying it. And in about 2007, 2008, I started getting really interested in the energy issue and learning a lot about it and working with my colleagues to develop my thinking. And in 2011, I decided that there needed to be an organization that was just devoted to this, that was really just devoted to energy and environmental issues and really giving a positive alternative to the green movement. So I called it the Center for Industrial Progress, and it's going to have a new name soon, but still Center for Industrial Progress for now. And just to give you a sense of where I was starting to use the ideas effectively, but just to put it in money terms, I was broke, and my first goal was to charge $1,000 for a speech. Like I figure, okay, maybe I get 20 speeches in a year, and eat government cheese or something. No, I didn't really think that, but I'll somehow scrounge it up, and maybe people will give me some money. And I remember people telling me at the time, like, nobody's going to pay you $1,000 to speak. Like, come on. I mean, why are they going to do that? The going rate for objectivists is like $500, and it's not a huge market. And I found out it was really hard to do. And so the first deal I ever negotiated was 5 speeches for $4,000, and one of them was a debate. So it was really hard to do. And so I couldn't sell myself at $1,000, and that was a reflection of people weren't really that interested in my ideas. And nobody in the field knew who I was, and I didn't feel like I had the ability to influence people. I didn't really know what to do, although I knew that by being on my own and by forcing myself to succeed or starve, that would be a really good incentive to figure things out. And a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about today was me came from that set of incentives. So I just want to give you that contrast for, I'll just tell you what happened to happen this week, and I hope you don't consider this bragging about numbers, but it's just sort of an indication of how things can change. So I happened to be in the area, which is part of the reason why I'm here. I gave a speech in Georgia yesterday to one of the, I can't say specific things, but one of the major oil companies in the world. And one of my goals was always to influence businesses, and I was never able to do it until about 4 years ago. And so that company paid me to come speak to their board of directors about the communication strategy. And that company is also having me develop a training course for all their employees. That's 10,000 people. So this is, and everyone knows that I'm in Ayn Rand. There's no secret about this. I didn't start hiding it to be successful. And so this company is, and it's surreal if you think about no company wanted to talk to me 5 years ago. Nobody was interested. And now they're flying me out to arguably the nicest hotel in America, paying $20,000 to have me speak for a couple hours to their board, which includes some of the most successful executives in the company, to guide their communications. And those communications are being guided by ideas that I learned from Objectivism. I applied them in different ways, but I learned them from Objectivism. And a couple days earlier, I was in West Virginia, incidentally in a place where I used to go to this poor summer camp, but in another place, and we discounted it so they only paid $15,000. So this was more than I certainly made in my first 2 years, on my own. And I respect markets. If people are paying for ideas in a large way and they weren't paying before, to me that's a strong indication there's something that I was doing right. And just in general, like I'll see stuff, I'll go on Facebook and I'll see, oh, John Stossel just happened to post a 5-minute clip of me talking about energy. Like 5 years ago, it was impossible in my mind. John Stossel didn't know who I was. Like, why would he do this? And so giving you this context is to show you that sort of rapid shifts are possible, and it's possible to be obscure, and it's possible to be really successful with the same basic brain. It's not like my brain changed, but my knowledge of really how to leverage objectivism, I think, has increased a lot by this experience. So hopefully that at least gives you an indication that I might have something valuable to say. So I hope I can just give you one valuable idea tonight out of the couple that I'll mention. And I want to start off with an exercise. So everyone look at their sheets. So this exercise is called the pie of ability, not to be confused with the pyramid of ability. Okay, so there's the pie of ability. And I'm focusing on the issue of ability. So there are a lot of things that can relate to career success. And there are several of them that I have basically no knowledge of or negative knowledge of, like how to be a really good employee and how to get along with everybody. Like, those are not strengths of mine. And those are important things to learn. And other people can teach you about those things, but I can't. But I can teach you about one thing, which is, and this is one advantage. And I remember Aaron Patzer and I had this discussion when in college people were telling us, like, you got to rush a fraternity, you got to meet people, all this stuff. And all we wanted to do, we had these apartments on Central Campus at Duke, which is this very sort of non-social part of Duke. And we just wanted to do our work. And his view and my view was just like, look, if we're good enough at our work, they won't ignore us at a certain point. So I put it as, like, if you have extreme and conspicuous productive ability, that'll make up for just about anything. So people cannot like you, but if you're that good, they'll need to like you. It doesn't matter. So that's what I want to focus on. Like, how do you develop extreme and conspicuous productive ability? And so what I like to do is this pie of ability is, I didn't have the graphic design talent to draw a pie, but imagine a 10-piece pie, right? And the pie consists of the 10 aptitudes that you think are most relevant to succeeding in your field. So here I put professional intellectual because that's what I know, but I want you to do this exercise just with 3 slices. So think of 3 aptitudes in whatever your chosen field is or what it might be that you think are super relevant. So if it's stand-up comedian, like maybe being really funny might be one of them. So just take a minute and do that. So write down, the field, and then just pick 3. So I put 10 for intellectual, but just pick 3. And I'm sorry for ignoring you guys on this side. I forgot about you. Okay, so most people got 3. Okay, so the next thing I want you to do, and you got to listen really carefully to this, think about what great looks like in every one of these. So try to think of the best person you've ever seen or heard about in this domain. I'll give you an example that I found very helpful. So for me, speaking. So speaking, when I used to think of speaking, I thought, well, the best speaker in objectivism, at least at the time, I thought was Leonard Peikoff. He was definitely the best teacher, and I learned the most from his lectures. And I saw him speak. I was fortunate enough to speak a couple times, and he was awesome. But I thought, like, okay, Leonard Peikoff, he might be the best speaker in objectivism. There's no way he's the best speaker in the world. So I want to isolate here. I want to isolate who's the best speaker in the world. So for me, the best speaker I ever saw live was Jerry Seinfeld. So like in my mind, I put Jerry Seinfeld, and what that did is that gave me a really high idea of how entertaining and captivating it's possible for an individual to be. Now I have these other slices that are not going to make me try to be a comedian, but to try to capture that. So take a minute to write down who is the best person you've ever seen at the aptitude that you're talking about. And if you can't think of a person, just try to describe it. All right, so if you haven't finished, you can finish it up later. So the next thing is treat the greatest as 10, and then think of where are you on a scale of 1 to 10. And don't feel bad if it's low, and don't lie. So one value of this, I think I've taught this to people who don't even know objectivism, and I think it's still really valuable. One valuable thing about this is that if you have a clear standard in your mind of what the ideal is, there's almost a magnetic pull toward it in everything that you do. I would go, let's take speaking. Ideally, after every speech, one reviews the footage, looks at it carefully, listens to it, corrects everything. I do not always or even usually do that. And as a result, I would be a better speaker if I did that all the time, but I wanted to do other things. But I have this in my mind that I have a certain standard in my mind of what the ideal element of different kinds of speeches, what the different elements are. And thus, every time I give a speech, my mind automatically starts comparing it to better versions of it. So I'm always catching things and I'm always getting better. And thus, if I give the same speech twice in the same day, the second version's always way better. And over time, I start picking up things and start getting better almost organically. Now, if you add deliberate practice to that, then you'll be a phenomenon. But it just has this magnetic quality that really pulls you if you have this ideal as a standard. So this is one way of thinking about in terms of where you are in your field. Like, what does your pie look like? And imagine if every element of you had a couple of 10s and then the rest 9s. Now, there are two senses of this. So one is like you can do it by percentile. So you can do it as in 90 would be 90th percentile, and 100 would be basically you're at the top. Or you could do it, that's not usually how we actually rank things though, like to be crude about it, when people rank looks, they're like, oh, that guy's a 9 or that girl's a 9 or whatever. It's usually not like 90th percentile, it's usually, they have this higher standard. So you might be you can just know which one you're doing. Like if you rank yourself a 3, it's either you're just saying it's really low or you're saying 7 out of 10 people are better. But let's just take out of 10. If on these things, if you could get to 9 out of 10 on all of them and then 10 out of 10 on a couple, you would be a phenomenon in your field, because very, very few people are at all complete in their field. Most people, even who are really good, have massive gaps in one area or another because they're not deliberate about it. Now, sometimes you can get away with that, sometimes you can't, but if you take this and you took this and you look at intellectuals, you'll find very few people who would be better at, than 9 out of 10 people. But if you can do that, it's unbelievable. And here's the thing, and this is where we connect to objectivism. I believe it's possible to do that kind of learning and that kind of aptitude. And I believe the philosophy of objectivism is something that can accelerate that dramatically. So that's really the connection. It's a way of thinking and a way of learning and a way of organizing and applying information that's just supercharged compared to anything else. There's no way I could have learned like sales and debating and discussion and all these things without objectivism. All right, so let's then go to this. What are some of the competitive advantages? And I'm just going to list 4, so you'll get a flavor of the way it works, the mechanics of it, but then you can always think of your own. So first, with the first one, I have purposeful integrated learning. So I'll tell you a story about how I learned about energy. So in 2007, I got really interested in energy. I learned the history of John D. Rockefeller, and I became fascinated by there's this one industry that powers every other industry, and then I looked at how we thought about it, and the thinking was garbage, and I thought, like, God, I would have loved to be around in the past when they had all these debates about energy, because I would have wanted to have my say. And like, oh, I can do that now. And I really want to correct the way people think about environmental issues. And I was really motivated, but I didn't know anything about energy. Like, I knew very little. I knew that I wanted to have an impact, but I knew very little. And by the time, like a year later, there's a course, I think it's still online, I gave at an ARI conference in 2008. And like I listened to that course, and to be honest, it's really good. Like, I knew a lot about energy a year later, but why was that? And people like thought I had PhDs in it like really, really quickly when I only had done it a year, within a year or two. And the reason is one of the most important objectivist principles, but the key is that I had it as a habit that I applied, which is purpose. So in everything in life, I want to know what is my purpose. And when learning about energy, I want to know what is my purpose. Now, most people who don't have the principle of purpose, when they learn about energy, they'll just start reading energy books, right? They'll just read like an intro to energy book, and they'll learn about oil, and so they'll learn about every little element of a drilling rig, how it works. I don't want to use terminology people don't know, but like all these little details, and they'll just kind of read encyclopedias. And I knew, like, if I do this, I'm never going to learn what I need to know. So what do I need to know about energy? What I need to know about energy and environmental issues is I need to know exactly as much as is necessary to give objective evaluations of the merits of certain technologies and policies. So I only need to learn enough about oil to know why do we use oil, what are the hazards of oil, but I do not need to know the specifics of a drilling rig. And if I do, I'm going to waste a huge amount of time. So what I did is I looked for, is there a resource that covers it on that level, that explains things to the level I want to know? And there was one resource, it was called Access to Energy, which was this newsletter written by a guy named Peter Beckman. And he explained things on the exact level that I needed. So what I did is I got someone at ARI, a volunteer, to like take 1,000 pages of of the things, which were in this very obscure format, and I got them put in one text file, and I put it on my Kindle, which at the time would read to you. And every day, when I drove back and forth to work, I just listened to that. And this is like Atlas Shrugged and a half in length. But I did it all the time, and I was a different animal by the time that I did it. By the time I did that, I had more of a global knowledge of energy than even certain professionals in the field, because I was so purposeful about what I was going to learn. And I'm still like that to this day. People think I know way more about energy than I know, like way, way more. But I know what I need to know. But I don't know what I don't need to know. And most people know lots of things they don't need to know because they're not purposeful with knowledge. So this just, one thing, right? Just one simple principle of purpose. You might read it and say, yeah, that sounds good. But the point is that used, and this is going to stress this later, used as a habit, and used as a guide, and used constantly, it had this incredible power. It made the difference between me taking years to become a mediocre, have mediocre knowledge, and almost immediately have really relevant knowledge. Another aspect, I said integrated purposeful learning, is, and this is just unbelievable with objectivism, is being able to organize things. I mean, if you need to read Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, because what it tells you is how to organize knowledge, how everything fits together, how there are certain things that are fundamental and certain things that are derivative, and they all have a structure and they all fit together in a certain way, and it tells you how to use concepts exactly. And just knowing that, I could fit things together in my head in a way that was so clear, and that even people who had been in the field for years didn't have, because they didn't know how to think clearly, because they didn't have that theory of knowledge, that theory of concepts. So it's like the purpose and the theory of knowledge, but used as a habit constantly, was this incredibly powerful thing. Now, to just indicate where I'm going to go with the next section, imagine if I had taken a different approach with this. Instead of really taking these principles as habits and being obsessed with using them to my advantage, I had just focused on the question, do I agree with objectivism or not? So I would read the section of Atlas Shrugged that said reason, purpose, self-esteem, say, that sounds good. Okay, I'm no longer a Jew. Like, I agree with this, right? And then I talk to other people, I'm like, hey, do you agree? Are you an objectivist too? And like, that's not really the point. I mean, the agreement is like, that's the first thing, that's fine. But the whole point is that it has to have utility to you. So like, when people tell me I agree or disagree with stuff, that's not my focus. My focus is, yeah, what's true, and then how do you use it habitually. So all of these things that you're learning in objectivism, used habitually, give you superpowers. Agreed with, give you nothing, except for a group of friends who say they agree with you and sympathize with your political opinions. All right, so I'll go through the other ones more quickly. Unique knowledge and insights. People think that, especially as an intellectual, if you're an objectivist, you're going to be at a disadvantage. Like, people are going to discriminate against you and whatever. And I've never really found that when I knew how to explain the things as a real person. Now, if I just said, which is this is what I said to my professors when I was 18, I just say, hey, I'm an objectivist, like, I'm right, you're wrong. And it didn't go over well. But if it's really a habit in your mind that you really have, that's internalized in your mind, then it'll be you. And when you're talking, you don't talk as Objectivism or Ayn Rand, you talk as you, except you've got these crazy things that no one else learned because they thought like Ayn Rand was some crazy person, so they never learned. So what started happening to me over time is people say, oh my gosh, you're so brilliant. I never heard that. Like, oh my gosh, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, well, I stole that from somebody, but that you wrote off because your teacher told you shouldn't read her. But like, I really stole it. I really, really stole it. I really internalized it. So for example, in environmental issues, there's this huge distinction that has been helpful for thousands of people. And I just make the point that when we're evaluating anything, like so if we're evaluating fossil fuels and their impacts, and we look at all the different, so one point is I'll say, well, we have to look at the full context. So we have to look at the positives and negatives of all the alternatives. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. So, but context is the key term in objectivist epistemology. And then I'll also say, well, when we look at the full context, we need to know how are we measuring what's good. Is our standard minimizing human impact, which is what we're taught? Our goal is to minimize human impact on the planet, or is it to maximize human flourishing? And I'll concretize that and I'll say, like, well, if you go on the minimum impact standard, was it a good idea to take a patch of dirt and trees in the Northeast United States and turn it into New York City? Is that a good idea if you want to be green? Is it a good idea to self-replicate and have a child? Which is a better country, North Korea or South Korea? So it's like, that's the point about, so there's two things I did there and like it blows people's minds. Oh my gosh, this concept green, I've never, like I use it all the time. And then you say, oh, but if we put it under maximize human flourishing, that covers what we care about with environment, but it also covers all these other aspects and it makes total sense. But this is just objectivism, right? This is just the point about standard of value, that in any context you have an implicit, at least, standard of how you're evaluating things. And then I'm just using concretization, right? Which is saying, okay, if I take this standard seriously, how do you apply it? And this is something this is the most powerful point to CEOs of companies, to anybody. And it's objectivism. But the point is that it's really a habit in my mind. It's really something that's internalized in my mind. So I say it as me and I say it correctly for the context given the person. I'm saying it as a really valuable thing. But again, it's not just I read OPAR, Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand, and I read, life as the root of value in the different parts, and I said, yeah, yes, I agree, yes, I agree, yes, I agree, now I'm an objectivist. It's like, yeah, no, I saw this stuff is at least basically right, but it's, I really want to understand it, and I really want to make use of it. And when you can do that, these insights are so powerful because standard of value is a really powerful insight. So objectivism is just full of these mental superpowers that if you really have them, it's unbelievable. So I won't go into the others because that should give you an indication. You could take any principle of objectivism, and if you really habituated it and made it your own, you would see how powerful it was. So this goes to the final concept, which I've indicated, which is making objectivism habitual, not just directional. So what do I mean by directional? Well, directional, and this is not a wholly bad thing, it's just very incomplete. Directional is kind of, I was 18 years old, I was Jewish, I believed in God, and I wasn't sure where I wanted to go with my life, I wasn't sure what the right political views were, and then I read Atlas Shrugged, and it, quote, changed my, this is all true, and it, quote, changed my life, and now I believe in laissez-faire capitalism, and now I say I believe in selfishness, and I don't believe in God, these different kinds of things. So it's sort of directionally that's going to have implications, like I'm not going to become a rabbi, for sure, and who knows what the implications are for voting this election, but I'm at least not going to call myself a Democrat or Republican. So there's all these different things, and so that has a value. It's sort of putting yourself in a certain direction, but that's really just a tiny, tiny bit of the richness, just to say, I'm going to go in this general direction of, say, being selfish. Because the whole point is not just be selfish, but what does that mean? And Ayn Rand has this incredibly rich analysis of what it means. And there are all these different identifications about honesty and independence and productiveness. And the value is in really understanding the genius of all those identifications and then habituating them and making them one's own. But what I often see is I see the directional approach a lot. And so here are some symptoms of it. One is, I mentioned before, the focus on agreement. Like when people say, like, do you agree with this? And like, are you an objectivist? And that kind of thing. And that makes it like a club. right? Like, are you part of my objectivist club? Like, and it's not a club at all. I mean, you can associate with groups, but it's not about membership, or it's about what ideas are true and powerful for you, and that's how to think of it. So it's like, once you agree with it yourself, then the next logical step is, how do you make use of it? It's not, how do I screen everyone in life to see if they're on my team or not? Another thing that I find with this directional thing is a focus on politics. So, and that goes with the club thing. Like, the most obvious thing with the club is that you're not one of those lunatics on your campus who just, wants to have, Bernie Sanders rule the world, or who thinks Cuba is the greatest place ever. Like, and you deal with all these people who are so politically opposed, and I'm very sympathetic to not wanting to associate with them and to have something to say against them, to talk about it on Facebook. And that's important, but really what matters most in your life and what you have most control over is your own life. And even with your friends, you want to be talking a lot about how do you live better lives, and how do you use these ideas or other ideas to benefit it. So that's one symptom. Another one, and I ask my friends this sometimes, I'll ask, when was the last time you read Ayn Rand? How often do you read Ayn Rand? Particularly, I've been in this now since '98, so 18 years. Like, I'll ask people, when was the last time you read Ayn Rand? And I asked my best friend this a couple years ago, and he said, I don't know, it's been like 5 years. And I said, try it. Try reading her again. See what it's like. And I had noticed this myself. And one person who made me notice this was Ankar Ghate, whom I got to work with and learn a ton from at the Institute. And he had many obvious mental powers, and he had obviously read Ayn Rand way more than the rest of us. And I realized this was not a coincidence at all. Like, so much of his power was taking her power by reading it over and over and over and thinking about it, and really thinking, if I think this person is so bright, I really want to get as much as I can from her. And this applies later in life. If I think this person is so insightful, if she was so insightful as to, quote, change my life, and I've gone 5 years without reading her, there's something off. Because it would be like, you have this amazing mentor, we have this mentorship program, right? You have this amazing mentor, you keep learning more every time you talk to the mentor, and then you just decide, I'm not going to see the mentor anymore, even though the mentor is still way ahead of you. So either you have to decide, I've surpassed the mentor, or I'm an idiot for not taking advantage of the mentor. So, but if it's directional, what you got from Ayn Rand was just a group membership, and that's what you needed, right? But if you wanted empowering knowledge, you can get more of that for the rest of your life. And then a final one, and if you're interested in learning more about this, there's a podcast, or I think it's on podcast, Yaron's radio show, Don Watkins interviewed me about this, and I gave a long discussion of this issue, but I'll give a short version now. You notice with some people who associate themselves with objectivism that they don't have an abnormal desire to learn, or even that sometimes they have a subnormal desire to learn. Like, say they're in psychology, and they don't seem very interested in psychology. Like, oh, I pretty much know about psychology. Like, emotions are a product of value judgments. Like, what else is there? Like, I get it. I don't know what all these psychologists are talking about. And I'm imitating myself when I was 20, by the way. That was really my view, and I had no interest in it. Subsequently, that's changed a lot because I realized, wait, no, objectivism is not claiming to know everything about life. It's claiming to identify certain very powerful fundamental drivers of success and failure in life, and those will help me apply all this other knowledge that I can gain. But the point is to gain as much life-promoting knowledge as I can. So if you see objectivism as this powerful set of fundamental ideas, then you're super eager to learn more, and you can organize it and apply it effectively. But if you see it as, oh, it's just setting my direction in life, then it's just sort of off to the side. It's like it has a religious quality to it versus a really empowering quality to it. So the contrast, I call this the habitual approach. Like the person who has it as a habit, who's on the premise of having it as a habit, their focus is on, I want to apply it in new ways. So I experience it just all the time as, these ideas are so powerful, how can I use them more and more and more in my ideas? And I'm constantly, as I develop my own ideas about environmental, say, philosophy, I'm constantly saying, oh, that connects to Atlas Shrugged in this way. Oh, that connects to Atlas Shrugged in that way. And it's really fascinating. There's a lot of focus, less focus on politics, more on personal habits, on just thinking like, wow, how can I use these ideas to make my life better? I mentioned this, not in these words, but mining Rand. So instead of not reading her, like thinking, how can I get as much as possible? of course, reading other people and mining them as well, but if you think she's one of the best, mine away. And then there's definitely an abnormally high desire to learn, because you have this ability to gain knowledge efficiently, to organize it, to apply it, and you have this fundamental conviction that knowledge is power, because you realize objectivism is power, so other knowledge is power, and certainly organized and amplified by objectivism is power. So it's just really amazing. So that's been my experience. I had this conviction when I started that it had this power to it, and it immediately improved my thinking. But it took a long time, and I still have a lot to learn, but to really use it to its full potential. And I think, I hope that some of these tools are helpful. I like this pie of ability. It might seem a little hokey, but it's super useful, and I think it's a good way of measuring where you are relative to where you want in terms of the abilities in your field. And I think if you can make things objective in that way, and you realize how powerful objectivism is in gaining new knowledge, in applying it and gaining new aptitudes, that should be able to accelerate things. So those are the core ideas I wanted to focus on. Just one final note. I think, Cassandra, you have the handouts, right? So final thought is that one of the reasons I came here, I was in Georgia last year for the conference, and I'm in Georgia this year for the conference. So it's really fortuitous that I keep getting speaking engagements in Georgia, right near this conference. And you can probably tell, I really love Ayn Rand. I'm really grateful, and anything I can do, for young people who are interested in Ayn Rand, I always want to do. And I would suggest, and I'm sure this applies to all the other speakers, but I would suggest that in addition to leveraging the ideas, leverage people whom you think are good at applying the ideas, and that includes me. People have come up to me, and that's really nice. Some of you have been nervous, and I guess that's flattering. But I'm very approachable. I might take a while to respond to my email, but you can definitely email me if you have any questions, and if you really want to learn, and I'll pick up on that. So I think I just want you to consider me as a potential resource if I can be one. And I know that the other intellectuals feel the same way. And when I was younger, I would feel like, oh, it's an imposition. Like if I go up to this person, it's an imposition. And for 1 out of 10, it was an imposition, and they were being a jerk, and that's fine. 1 out of 10 rejection is fine. 9 out of 10 is fine. But most people were super, super helpful and believed I was sincere and wanted to help me. So in terms of keeping in touch, I listed a bunch of different ways. So you're welcome to friend me on Facebook and all those other things. But the number one thing I hope you'll do is get on our mailing list, because I send out just one mailing every week. I'm not a spammer. But I think we're doing some really important work. And if you want to keep in touch and just see what's going on and see the latest evolution of everything, that's the best place to be. So as another incentive, I have I Love Fossil Fuels pins, and if you put your name on it, I will give you one. And with that, thank you for having me. Let's take questions. Yeah.
Do you have a particular Ayn Rand character or hero that you've looked up to and tried to draw personal inspiration from? If so, who?
Well, it's a lot of them, because it's like you can tell with the pie of ability thing, I'm very into extracting what I want from different things. And one of my productive heroes, Jerry Seinfeld, is like a master of this. So Seinfeld once studied Scientology, and he got made fun of for that. And his view was Scientology, they do I studied it for a tiny bit, because there's 2% of something that they're on to. It's I took the 2% and that was it. And that's what I do with everything. And I'm into lots of things that people think are weird, like meditation. I do that 100%, transcendental meditation. But so with a character, it's kind of it doesn't really, the character is never going to map to me fully. So it's going to always be artificial to do it. And my favorite characters change. So it used to be Francisco, and now it's John Galt. But it's not like I'm John Galt. It's obviously it's just at this point in reading Ayn Rand's books, the particular nature of the clarity he has is something I just find particularly intoxicating. But I try to mine all of them. I mean, it's in the same way I try to mine all the teachers I have. I mean, in those cases, it's really what can you learn from them or what can you emulate. But they're mostly people that you're like admiring in action, and sometimes they have attributes that you're not going to have. It's not like I'm going to be a steel magnate or something like that, or as smart as John Galt. So if you take one of the best scenes in the book as an example, I'll try not to get emotional talking about this one, but I was just rereading it with some high school students, and the scene where he has, where Dagny visits him after, when she can't bear because Mr. Thompson told her that they might torture him if they found him, so she wants to see if he's all right, and she goes. And the first thing, does anyone remember what the first thing he does is? He what? And what does he say? Someone's got to know. Otherwise, you got to read Ayn Rand more.
You were right.
I know.
So, but one of the first things he does is he comments on her sweater and says, "Next time, wear a white one." And she thinks that's the last thing I expected to hear, but it made total sense. Why? Because his focus is totally on what he wants. And then he has that amazing line, we don't think of pain or fear. It's not that we don't feel pain, or it's, I'm butchering it, but it's we don't think of these things 1 second longer than we need to. We think, and so that was his premise. Like, this is his wife, the woman who will be his wife. And so what he first thinks of is how lovely she is. And then it's, we got to survive this. And so that's just something where, like, oh, that's a good mind shift. That's something I can pick up from him versus, oh, I'm going to go be John Galt. Yes?
So you talk a lot about like habits, which
Mm-hmm.
are really important. But say you're trying to instill a new habit.
Mm-hmm.
How do you go about that methodically until it becomes just second nature? Is there like a method, like just keep track of every day?
There are for a lot of habits. There's all these ideas about, and I haven't studied them systematically, and I don't know how much they vary among people, such as, it takes 21 days to make a habit and whatnot. I do really well with standards in my mind. Like, so I have an idea of, like, I'll just kind of focus my mind. For instance, one thing I do is I'll have a meeting with somebody on a regular basis, sometimes daily, and I'll just say, like, hey, these are 3 things I want to remember. Like, every day we'll just have the conversation. It'll just be 3 things that I want to remember, or 3 things that I want to measure. But let's say purpose. So my best friend Jesse, like, let's say we have a meeting, and we just always know. It's funny because, like, a couple years ago I taught him about purpose in writing. And what happens about every month or two is we're having some problem, and we tell the other person, and then it's always, you forgot your purpose. Like, there's always the mistake, right? We always make, and now we can remind each other, but it's that habit has been building for 8 years, and it'll never stop building. But that's an issue of just, we're not really saying, oh, I'm going to become more purposeful today, but we're just being reminded of the. So that's one way. So I would just say experiment with different ways and find out what's the highest priority. But if you just read stuff that seems relevant, and you keep thinking about how it applies, and you keep doing that, over time, this stuff will become part of your mental set. Like, I don't feel like there was one particular month when I said, I'm going to learn how to think, I'm going to learn classification by essentials super well. But that idea kept coming up when I kept listening to lectures, and I kept thinking about it, and then over time, I got a lot better at it. So that's my own thing. I think you can, with these kinds of making these habitual in your mind, I don't think it has to be one at a time in the same way that sometimes people will say with weight loss. Like, okay, I'm going to stop. You can't say I'm going to not eat sugar, and then I'm going to wake up at 4 a.m. and I'm going to meditate 8 times a day. Like, you can't stack habits too much that way. But I think intellectually they can be more blended together. Yes.
So you said regarding unique knowledge and insights. You said you need to know how to use these the unique knowledge you find in Ayn Rand's habitual, right? But how do you know that, like, you can read a lot of Ayn Rand? How do you know, like, okay, this is what I need to, like, focus more on? Like, is what I'm asking, like, is it certain to particular fields that, like, okay, I feel like Ayn Rand can help me in my particular field with this. How would you recommend circling in on or honing in on what you need to focus on in her
Yeah.
thought.
One resource, if you want to find it online, I did an interview on some of these topics in the Objective Standard maybe 6 months ago, so that might be a good thing to look at. But one element that came up actually on Facebook Live a couple weeks ago, and so you can watch that on my Facebook page, is that all of this is in the context of I'm always focused on creating value for my audience. So I'm thinking, so let's take the issue of helping CEOs and their companies persuade the public that what they're doing is good so that their projects don't get stopped and not as many bad laws get passed. I'm thinking of them in that context. So I don't think like, oh, let me pick an idea of Ayn Rand's and then let me go make some money off of it, so much as what are the real problems that people face? And then I have this knowledge and then I think what's really relevant to that. So one thing that's super, super relevant is that because they've bought into the green standard of value, they inadvertently never talk about the connection between what they do in human life because they've been taught to think of energy as green or not green. And then I know that, and I know that it's much more persuasive if you talk about it in human terms. So then I'll explain this point of standard of value and say, look, you're accepting the other side's standard. And I have a bunch of ways of explaining that. And if you use this standard, it'll be really useful. But it's like it's really good to treat objectivist knowledge as like any other knowledge. It's what's the most valuable knowledge to solve this problem. So the idea is, in general, you have this idea that objectivism gives you valuable knowledge for solving problems and achieving things. And the more you have internalized that, and the more you think of it when you think of problems, you'll see, oh, this is really useful. But it's never like round hole square peg type stuff. It feels really organic, and it takes a while in a given field. Like I had no idea how much objectivism applied to. I didn't even fully understand until I wrote the book, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. And actually, that's not even true. Since in the 2 years since then, what I found, which is fascinating, that was when I talked to, the more philosophy I put in the talks, the more they were clarifying to people, the more people value. So people would just go nuts over epistemology. And I didn't expect that at all, but I was looking at what creates value for them. I certainly wasn't saying, oh, I want to talk to the executives about epistemology. I tried to avoid it at first, and then I just sounded like everyone else with a slightly different conclusion. Yes?
You talked about purposeful integrated learning.
Mm-hmm.
It came to mind real fast. You don't know what you don't know, right?
Uh-huh.
So like, how do you figure out what's the most important thing to know when, that's like completely new to a field, how do you know what's the most important thing?
So let's take an example. What's an example?
I don't know, I'm thinking kids going to high school and they say like, oh, what am I going to use math for? Like, I never want to learn this. And then imagine like, you go your entire life never knowing how that or.
Uh-huh. Oh, one question is, are those sheets of paper getting passed around? The handout? Oh, okay, yeah. I just never want to lose you guys, that's why. So that's a slightly different context. So in this context, I'm talking about career where the starting point is you have a certain kind of thing you want to achieve. And then that's the purpose, which then sets the standard for what kinds of things you want to know. So it's not always obvious exactly what it is, but for my case, I knew I wanted to write about energy and what's good and bad in terms of how we should use energy and what policy should be toward energy. So I knew that the key things I needed to know were all the different aspects of energy and environment as they pertain to human flourishing. Like that's the piece of knowledge I needed to know, right? So I gave the example of a drilling rig. Like there's something called mud that's involved in that process. Now I happen to know that, but there are many types of mud, and like if I look into that, I'm going to spend my whole life learning about mud. So I can make a distinction between this, and that's good for the person who does it, and it's really important that somebody, but it's really important that I don't. So that's what. Do you have any? Whereas in high school, and part of what's important in education for people to think about in constructing education is what are the universal things that are going to be really valuable that obviously the kids they're not pursuing one thing, nor should they be. What are the generalized things? And there's a lot of challenge in that because there are critics who say, well, people are learning all these generalized things and forgetting them. So then is it they're not being taught those properly, or that it's the mental habits that you learn from learning them, even if you forget them? And I have certain views on this, but that's a different kind of problem that I don't have as much confidence in the exact right approach. But with this, it's always just, what is my purpose? What do I need to learn to achieve it? And I won't know 100%, but I'll know where to look, and I'll know, certainly you'll know a lot of obvious things you don't need to know, and a lot of obvious things you do need to know. So for example, I needed to learn quite a bit about the CO2 issue. Like, there was no discussing fossil fuels without discussing the fact that as a byproduct, CO2 is produced and aggregates in the atmosphere. Like, I knew that was relevant, and then I had to sort of figure out, well, how much do I need to know about that? And so that was useful. In the back.
You listed your field specialized knowledge as part of your hive ability.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, who's the person that you think of as an example of excellence in that regard?
In my field?
Or just, who do you personally think of as an example of that?
Well, one thing about that, so you can, there's a case for putting different types of specialized knowledge and for being deeper about that. There's a reason, schematically, I did this because I want people to think about a lot of different elements that will make them more complete and more effective. Like, I put things like sales, and I talked about this in the objective standard, because understanding how to persuade people to buy things is super important, because that's the hardest form of persuasion, to get them to open up their wallet. And in one way or another, you're related to finances. Even if you're a nonprofit, you need to know how to raise money. You need to know something about that. But it could be that, really relatively, there are 3 or 4 or 5 that are in my field. So, so who do I think is the best? At this point in my field, I am. But I think that, but it's not, in terms of whom I look up to, I'd say Peter Beckman was the person. And still, in terms of knowing, so yeah, I'll give you, like, in terms of specialized. So in terms of, like, my pie of ability, I pursued it for exactly what I need. So at a certain point, I'm going to become the epitome of it, unless there's somebody who's trying to do that exact thing who's better. Nobody's trying to do that exact thing, and thus nobody is better at that exact thing. But like Peter Beckman, in certain ways, in terms of knowledge of, like, a lot of things. There's a guy named Michael Lynch who's, like, amazing in terms of price forecasting. So I have a podcast called Power Hour, and a lot of people like it, so you might try listening to it. And I bring on my favorite people, and with some of them you'll be able to tell that I'm a fanboy, and those are my favorites. Yes?
I don't mean to derail the conversation, but what are your thoughts on the Dakota Access Pipeline situation?
Yes, this is a specific thing. The basic thing is the opposition is very irrational, and it's irrational in the conventional way, which is being against every form of affordable energy. And then in particular, it's in a very tribal way. So very focused on leaving aside the specifics of whether the tribe is there or whatever the history is, but very focused on, like, primitive rituals and traditions matter, and our actual modern traditions and desires don't. So there's very much a worship of primitive, which is very aligned with the worship of unaltered nature as the ultimate thing. So it's like we worship things to the extent that they are non-human. So it's like we worship primitive people over people, and we worship nature over primitive people. And I'll never forget the Ayn Rand comment. She's just always making these comments that just, you think, like, why didn't I think of that? And she made the point about how a clay pot is considered sacred and a plastic cup is considered ugly. And you think about how amazing a plastic cup is. It's unbelievable what that thing can do. But it's ugly because it's made by us. And so I have this idea that because we have an opposition to everything man-made, so anytime the rest of nature makes something, it's good. Anytime we make something, it's bad. So we have a bias against the human race. So I call this human racism, which is going to be a future book title of mine. But that's a big example of human racism, is that pipeline. Opposition. Yes?
The next person who has a question is speaking to this mic. You want to try to do that?
Oh yeah, you guys are getting shafted over there. I'm just dodging your question because you look scary.
So basically, I'm curious, how do you get mental clarity on, like, a regular basis?
Can you be
meditation?
Mental clarity as against what?
Internal clarity.
Can you give me an example?
like being able to organize your thoughts in a concise manner, like be able to expound something and a new idea effectively.
Okay, so I don't think that's 100% clear. So I'll give 3 different aspects, and maybe one of them will be useful, and some of them will be useful. So let's take first. Let's stipulate that you have a certain capacity for getting clear, just at your best, right? You can get a certain amount of clarity, given your current abilities. So one thing is, how do you stay in that state as much as possible, right? How do you perform at your best? And that a huge amount of that is physical. So I do meditation. So meditation is, for me, I'm always looking for ways to do a rejuvenation or a mental reset. So something that just I feel completely refreshed, and also I'm completely disengaged from any particular content, so that I feel like I call it altitude. I feel like I have a high level perspective, and I can think at my most clear. So I try to structure my life such that I have as much altitude as possible, and so that includes meditation. Hasn't included enough going to the ocean lately because I've been on the road a lot. And I ride something called a one wheel, which is an electric skateboard. That's become, I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Eating well is really important. So like I gauge all these things, and I actually have to pay someone a fine if I violate them. I structure it because it's that important to so sort of whatever my current capacity is, I want to function at it 100% using all the physical tools I can. But then there's also the question of how does your best get better? And I think everyone has an internal sense of clarity in that there are some things that you feel that you're clearer about than others. So some things, perceptually, obviously, but even conceptually, some things you feel like, I really get that, which really means when I say these words, I understand exactly what they mean in reality and exactly what they don't, which is a lot of what clarity is. And then when I say these other words, I don't feel so clear about that. So you can use that as a standard, like that can be your internal standard. It really has a feel to it by which you can evaluate what you know and what you don't know as well. I use that a lot. The other thing is you can use external sources of clarity. So I had a very formative experience. I was listening, I think I was 19, and I was listening to Leonard Peikoff's lecture, Why Johnny Can't Think. And he got a question about basically, shouldn't we just privatize all the schools and that'll fix everything? And like in my mind, I thought, oh, well, obviously, laissez-faire capitalism, competition will lead to the best result, like obvious. And he said no. And I was like, what the hell? How could that be? But then he explained that would give you the best chance of it, but that he's not a Marxist in the sense of economics determines everything. Somebody has to figure out the truth, and that's difficult, and they have to spread it. So the free society is the context in which that has the best chance, and the only one in which it really has a chance. But you needed that, and that was just something in my mind where I thought, oh, I'm not as clear as he. I don't hold the ideas in my mind with the same richness that he does, and that's why Q&As are really valuable. If you listen to how the person answers it, you say, well, why wouldn't I have answered it that way? And you can do this in reading too, like, why did Ayn Rand word it this way? And you don't surrender to that. You don't automatically say, even though you probably know her way is better than yours, but you always challenge it. But you sort of say, like, why did she put that word there? And why doesn't that make any sense to me? And then you get to use other people's minds. So I try to expose myself as much as possible to people who think more clearly than I do, or think clearly in different fields. And then I'm obsessive about those clarity issues. And I'm more internally unclear than almost anyone I've ever met, in the sense of how much I'm challenging my own clarity. Like, I'll think about a word for 4 years. Like, is this the right word to explain this? And it's more enjoyable than you might think. Than that sounds. Yes.
So what are some of the drivers, both in your story and the stories of people you know, for driving the switch from directional learning to habitual learning? Because it seems like there's a lot of inertia behind directional learning. It's basically kind of what we learn in school. Is you go read an encyclopedia entry on something, you gather all the knowledge, but you don't really use it. What was it for you, and what have you seen external factors that kind of incentivize that switch over?
I just want to see how I worded it. So it's not all knowledge necessarily. I mean, I'm talking about objectivism in particular. So it's thinking of a philosophy as just, is this giving you like a general vector in life? Like it just sort of changes your course a little bit? Or is this really giving you not just a direction, but like all of these powers to move yourself in that direction? I hope that if you just hear this talk, that'll be enough. But seriously, like you have to have it in your mind. The clarity issue I mentioned with Peikoff, like I'm always on the premise of getting better. And as soon as I saw that, like, this matters. So I think maybe part of it is just how much of a genuine self-improvement mentality do we have? And a lot of that I feel like the only my only two advantages in life are high standards and intellectual honesty. Because high standards means that I know what good looks like, and intellectual honesty is I know that I'm not there. And that has a very pulling effect. So then if somebody tells me something I don't know, it makes a very strong impression on me. And also, I don't have the idea that I'm bad for not being as good as I will be tomorrow. Is there anyone who could get some water? Yes.
I have a question. This might be a little bit not specific enough, but
Okay.
like you've talked a lot about purpose and how everything should tie back to that.
Mhm.
And there's a billion things you can do for self-improvement, right? You can start talking to a mentor, you can start reading more, you can start exercising, you can start eating healthy, all this stuff.
Right.
How do you pick what to do first? Right? Like how do you connect which area you decide to work on to whatever your purpose is when you know you do eventually need all of those things? How do you prioritize?
Well, you don't eventually. So I like to think of things a lot in terms of business. So I'll give a business analogy, and maybe that'll help. So I think of business. A business is like a person in that it's always a work in progress, right? There are always things that can improve about it. But the great thing about a business is it's got this exact metric of purpose, which is profit, right? So you get to see, like, are we making money? Thank you. Like how are we doing? Now there's other things that you could measure things in terms of, but let's just say it's just profit and loss. So then if I was just thinking of profit and loss, there are a million things that I could do to improve my company, right? I could definitely become a better boss. I could say more charming things on Facebook. I could send our clients nicer Christmas gifts. No, but these things are all directionally good, right? They're pointing me towards some purpose. But there's a huge difference in the magnitude of how much it drives me toward the purpose. And there's this idea of 80-20 has become very popular in recent years. So the idea that 80% of the results come from 20% of the actions. And then you can subdivide that and say, well, within the 80, there's an 80-20. So actually overall, 64% of the results come from 4% of the actions within that. So there's 51% of the results come from 1% of the actions. No, but you can think of it as crazy. If you think about, like, what is the 1% of things that I've done that generated 51% of the results? Sometimes you can find something. So what you're looking for is leverage on the things. And you have to be very ruthless about not doing things because they're, quote, positive. So so much of the skill, insofar as you can guess in advance, is doing things that you expect to be really, really positive. And this goes to my philosophy of cultural movements and organizations and whatnot in my own organization. I'm very much on the premise of everything that I do, like all of our core things, I intend to be cultural game changers. So like the next step of what we're doing is intended to be 100 times more effective than all of the previous steps combined. So that's just how I think of things, and I'm looking for what's that thing. And then I have an idea of it, and I'm working on it now. And I'm not 100% sure that I'm right, but I think there's enough probability to it, and there's enough magnitude to it where it's, that's worth doing, as long as I take care of the other things. And there's an analogy in personal life. Like, it could be that the highest leverage thing you could do would be to, let's just say there was some like personal trauma or something, and you decided I need to work 40% less. Like that can happen, and that would be a really hard decision for somebody, especially somebody productive. But somebody could say, look, that's the one that's going to generate the 51%, because to recover, I need to do that. Now, for somebody else, it could be get off your ass. You're not working at all, and like stop being lazy. That's going to be the number one thing. Like make yourself work. So I think if you just look for what has the highest leverage to it, you'll find enormous differences between opportunities. And if you really use that, you'll have a period where you'll be like, holy crap, I waste a lot of my life. But that's good. That just means the rest of your life will be a lot better. I can't. Oh yeah. Sorry. guy I keep ignoring.
You study philosophy, right?
Yes.
Aside from becoming a professional intellectual, what were you planning to do with your philosophy degree?
Well, so the reason I got a philosophy degree, so there's two things. I decided I wanted to be in philosophy and writing about and applying philosophy when I was 20. I decided this very reluctantly because since I was a child, I thought intellectuals were losers. So I was very disappointed to find out that I wanted to be one. But the reason I got a philosophy degree was that I was studying computer science, and I definitely wanted a computer science degree rather than a philosophy degree, which I thought was disreputable, even once I had decided to be in philosophy. But computer science is really hard, and it was taking up a lot of my time. So then I just got the minor, and then I just did philosophy because it was the easiest thing at my school. No, and it was helpful. But most of what I learned about philosophy and anything else I studied on my own. I'm not a good school learner. The number one thing I learned from philosophy, which has benefited me so profoundly, is how bad people with bad ideas think, or how people with bad ideas think, some of whom are bad people. I never would have understood that had I not attended, I would never went to grad school, but going to grad classes and interacting with people and arguing with them and seeing how they responded to me. I still remember the people and how they think, and just meeting people in your field is so useful. But I mean, before that, I wanted to be I had a bunch of things. I basically wanted to be a billionaire tech entrepreneur. And an embarrassing fact, if we're going to share things like this, is after I read The Fountainhead, I wanted to have a media empire. So I took the wrong lesson from Winans. Because I thought, well, I want to change everyone's mind in the right way. Which he also thought. But anyone else? Oh, wait. Did you already ask a question?
No.
Oh, okay. Then you may ask.
Thank you. All right. So as a value creator, what are some of the specific opportunities that you found that have catapulted your career as a professional speaker? Speaking is sort of derivative. It's almost nobody is a professional speaker who's not known as a thought leader in the field, certainly not in ideas. There's a bunch of, quote, professional speakers, and they're not that successful, and it's a really rough way to make a living because you don't really know anything. And people get that after a certain point of time. So hopefully that's not mean to anyone I know. But so I guess the real thing is, the two elements of that would be having interesting enough and prominent enough ideas that people were interested, and then being a good enough speaker where you get word of mouth. So the speaking, I guess, is easier. It's this kind of thing. I mean, the opportunity is just being in the different places with the different audiences, and just learning from trying to learn as quickly as possible, and really having the mental fortitude to deal with not being very good. And one experience that's kind of painful to remember is the first time I got to speak to a group of 15 CEOs in Canada worth $500 billion total. The companies were $500 billion. This was when oil prices were higher. But this was the opportunity, and I knew 100% I do not know how to take advantage of this opportunity. I knew I didn't, because I didn't understand business. I didn't understand how they think. I understood how professional philosophers think. I didn't understand how businessmen think. And I was not very well received by a lot of them. And that's pretty heartbreaking to have when you feel like this is an opportunity. But I had the fortitude, and someone kind of rubbed it in and said, yeah, they didn't think you were that good. I was like, oh, God. I wanted to be good, but I knew, this is necessary for me to get better. So I really had this premise about, I'm going to go through this process, and it's going to end up well. And the silver lining of that actually is, in preparing that talk, I knew it might not go over well, so I wrote an essay in advance to the CEOs, because I was a better writer than speaker. I mean, still am, but that essay was called The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. And after it, they were attacking me and saying, you're not nearly as good as that essay. And then I thought, well, I should publish that essay then. And so I published it, and then within a month, an agent contacted me and said, hey, I can get you a six-figure advance on this. And I'm like, there's no way in hell nobody's going to read my objectivist views on this, right? And we had a deal with Penguin within a month. So that was a silver lining to me being bad at speaking to that audience. But that's so, I mean, again, I said all I have is high standards and intellectual honesty, so it's like that cycle, and you just keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it, but I'm never going to pretend that I'm better than I am, or not deliberately. You can always be wrong about it. And then in terms of the ideas, it was really that point of understanding what ideas I care about that are really valuable to other people. So look at, go on YouTube and look at my talk last year for Strive Your Personal Value Proposition, because I talk about something called the career Venn diagram, which is basically that good products and good careers are the intersection of the problems that you like to solve with the problems other people need solved. So when, I remember Onkar once said, like he just sort of in passing said things, I'd really remember them. Like he would just say, you know, an intellectual product is a product, and like it's useful to think of it that way. And the more I thought of it that way, the more I'd think, is this really valuable to people? And so now I can see, oh, this idea will be really valuable. So that when it's really valuable, they pay for it and they demand it. Yes, in the back.
Sorry, real quick before that, I'd just like to let everyone know we're technically at an hour now, so this is all the time that was technically allotted for the event. If Alex would like to stay and answer questions, that's great. And if students would like to stay and listen, that's also great.
Yeah.
But just know that this, you know, if you were planning to leave after an hour, it's been an hour.
Also, yeah, just make sure to fill out the form. That's all I really care about. And or you can send me an email at that address. But I have a lot of endurance. I'll be a zombie after this. This is one of the truths about speaking that I found is I can speak forever, and I'm a moron right after. So I always want to go on as long as possible because I don't like the idiot feeling afterward.
I promise I'll make this question worthwhile.
All right.
Well, first off, so at the beginning I heard someone up here asked, what's your favorite character that Rand wrote about? And I'm not sure, it's hard to choose one, but I know one for sure that would like you the most, Ellis Wyatt.
You think so?
Yeah.
All right.
But so on the topic of entrepreneurs, I was just going to ask you, like, who's one that struck you that's like your favorite?
I'm super cliche. I like Steve Jobs. I'm big into interviews. So like the best, almost every really, really good person at something that has a lot of art to it does not write about it well, or does not write about it, period. So there's no chance in hell Steve Jobs is going to write a book like how to manage or how to innovate or something. But he's been put in all of these interview situations, and whether he wanted to be in them or not, he gives an incredible amount of insight about his thought process. So having listened to hundreds of hours of that, I get a lot. I think it's worth noting with entrepreneurs just that it's very easy to be, like, you have to sort of first learn that it's really hard to learn from entrepreneurs, and then you can start to learn from them in pieces. So I like this pie of ability. Again, I like sort of assembling different parts of different things, but like it's really hard even to watch Steve Jobs and say, okay, I'm going to do that. Like, what is that? Right? But what you really need to have for yourself in a given field, if you're an entrepreneur, is you have to have what I call a working system. So you have to know basically how to start a business, how to create value, how to understand a customer, how to sell, how to manage. Like those things need to work. You have to have them integrated and functional. And then once you can make it all work, then you kind of know the baseline of, okay, this is what it means to do this. And then you can learn a lot from somebody because you can amplify a specific capability. Like you can say, oh, Steve Jobs talked about marketing this way, and he talked about marketing with a purpose, and he brought up Nike, and I'll study Nike, and I can learn from them, and I can deal with this piece. But at the beginning, you're just chaos. So the best thing I think to do, which I didn't, but I would recommend to my old self, is like gain a general knowledge about business and entrepreneurship, and get a basic working ability, and then find the people. So Steve Jobs, I'm trying to think of, I don't know why I can't. I mean, the two people I always follow are Jobs and Seinfeld. Like I've listened to hundreds of hours of interviews. Seinfeld because, and my bias is entrepreneurial people who are artists. Because for me, like the thing that I like most is creating things that I think are like beautiful and impactful. So like I have a business, but for me it's really about the products that I'm creating versus other things that people, like even a movement or something. Like for me, the product is the most exciting. It's like I watch lots of Seinfeld because he created the greatest comedic product ever, and I love like hundreds of hours studying how they did that, which was just how did you put together this amazing show that had 180 episodes that everyone still wants to watch. And the people who do it best are usually dramatically different than the people who are doing it third best. So Jobs, I think, did it the best in terms of, I think Jobs is the way he thinks about product is like 5 times better than the next person's. And I think the way Seinfeld thinks about like creating comedic products, maybe Larry David too, is like way better than the next. So I try to do that, but it's in the context of I need to understand the basic thing. So like in art, I need to understand how to write and create a good product, and then I can learn from other people. But if I just try to copy the best person, I'm going to be incomplete. Yes?
Some inspiring talkouts. And going on the fact that you said you're a better speaker, or a better writer than a speaker, have you thought about putting this into a book? Applied Objectivism? Or, the title was on the sheet.
Anyone's free to rip anything I say about applied objectivism off, because I'm a big believer in sequence in life, and this because in part leverage and sequence are related. Because like I had an idea, never told anyone this. I've told people privately, but like I created something that I think is incredibly cool, and maybe someone will be inspired to come talk to me about it. Particularly if that person's name is Greg, if he's still here. I created something 8 years ago. It's called AynRandFAQ.com. I still own it. And it was a way of presenting the philosophy that was based on the questions that people came in with 99% of the time. And the way it was structured was such that I felt like you could organically have one question, and you could learn the entire philosophy. Like you could read through the whole thing, and you get the entire philosophy in like the exact way you would need to know it. And as you might imagine, I didn't write this out, but I wrote out the questions, and I showed it to some people, and I thought it was really good, and I had this real desire to do it, and I still want it done. It's really exciting. People have seen it say, like, oh, you got to do it. But I also, at the same time, was getting into the subject of energy. And I calculated at the time, I was really interested in both of them, but like the energy one made sense as a place where I really knew how to create value. And I thought that if I could learn how to create value in a specific field using objectivism, I'll have a much better idea of how to create something valuable as a whole with objectivism. I was still at the stage where I hadn't created that much that was specifically valuable to people, so I was just too much of a generalist. And I started off as a generalist, and I like having a lot of specialized knowledge about one thing because it gives me a much better idea of how to apply general knowledge to specifics. So that's the kind of thing where, I'm mentioning it now to people, so anyone's welcome to, I'll show it to people if they ever want to see, or some people if they ever want to see. But like, I have this love of objectivism proper, and in my sequence, in my life, dealing with it in a systematic way, and like a book I want to write, that might be like 15 or 20 years. Like that's the plan down the line. Right now it's change the environmental philosophy of the culture and then teach every other field how to move the philosophy in the direction of freedom. Like those are the big, those are not easy projects. So those are the things, but then I'm really also interested in that other thing. But part of the reason I do stuff like this is because I still feel like I've learned things that aren't out there that people don't know. And I want people to have them earlier rather than later, because I would have liked to have them at your age rather than my age. And also so that people can take them and run with them. So it's not like all of these things that I'm talking about, there's a lot there, but to write a book, you'd need to develop it 10 times more. So I'm in no position to write the book about it, but maybe one of you will, and if I can help, I will. That's part of why I give out my contact information. I mean, ultimately what I think all teachers of any kind, and a writer is a teacher, you want to save people all the time that it took you to learn what you know. And you want to empower them to do more than you've been able to do. So everything I do is in that spirit. So yeah, I will not be at all upset if I see, like, I'm not like, oh, that person stole my idea. Like, this just, I want my idea stolen much more. Yes?
Hi. So I really like this idea of you have this unconventional career that you're interested in, where it's a unique purpose. or I don't know if that's how you see it, but starting a for-profit intellectual mercenary kind of.
It's a universe of one, so yes.
Right, exactly. So I think that a lot of kind of people in the objectivist movement who are entrepreneurial have run into that, and they have to figure out a way how to forge a path where there aren't a lot of like established models to follow. So what sort of tips do you have for creating your own opportunities rather than working in a field where people often stumble upon them because they're kind of already established?
Can you give me a hypothetical example?
Yeah.
Because like I know my own really well.
Yeah, I mean, I want you to build off of your own, but essentially, like, what was it that, how did you take what you wanted and then converted that to what someone could give you, and then figuring out how to wedge yourself into those kinds of places? Like, was it networking? Was it looking towards certain fields? Or was it selling yourself a certain way? Or how did you basically start from zero, from like nothing, as someone that like nobody wanted to hear talk, to
They don't want to pay. I mean,
well, I mean,
if I had paid them, they would have been okay.
Pardon.
Yeah, no. I got it. That's a good question.
You know what I mean? And to somebody who incrementally got better, like you did all of that. I would like to know how or what you initially think of on that.
So I have a theory about business, which I don't know if it's right, but it seems right. And that's that every really good business or new business has to be based on at least one fundamental insight, like one really good fundamental truth that you recognize about how to create more value for somebody. And I don't remember them all offhand, but I think I once counted that I thought we had 4. But one, the first one, was in the title, the Center for Industrial Progress. Came from a bunch of experiences, but basically I had this idea that what I realized was even when my philosophy was right, I was always trying to argue against the negative. I was trying to show how the negative was bad. So I could show how bad solar and wind were, I could show how bad environmentalists were, but that it wasn't positive. And then and it wasn't inspiring people. And then I started talking about the things that I found most inspiring. Like I'd tell people about how many things were made of oil. And it was mind-blowing how exciting that was for people just to learn about, wait a second, like, wait, what's carpet made of anyway? Like, it's not a plant, and it's not a metal, and like, it's not a rock, and like, and what's insulation, and what's, like, I don't know, what's plastic? I mean, plastic is plastic, but what's plastic? And then wait, it's that stuff that was in the BP oil spill? Like, that's like, who did that, and that's unbelievable. And like, everything is oil, that's what you figure out at a certain point. And the ingenuity of this industry to take this glop and then to make all these useful materials that enhanced our lives and made bulletproof vests and comfortable beds. Like I would share that with people and they'd start getting excited. And then at a certain point I conceptualized this as there needs to be a positive alternative to the green movement. And I had this idea, if there is one, there's going to be a lot of people who don't like the green movement who will be inspired by it, and a lot of people who do who will be given an alternative. And so I knew that. It's weird to say I knew it because it hadn't been tested. But I had this very strong confidence that there is a way for this to work, but this is the key to it. Like, that doesn't mean that I know how to do it at all, because I don't know the implementation. So there's the fundamental insight, and then there's the details of implementation. And I don't think anyone has any business starting a business or a new thing if they don't feel like they have some fundamental insight. I might take that back, but at the moment, that's how I feel. And I felt like another one we had was the idea of the for-profit think tank. That instead of getting donations, this took a couple years to really fully develop, but we would measure by money. And the basic idea was if I looked at the most influential people in the culture, many of whom I didn't like Malcolm Gladwell or Paul Krugman or these guys, they were all millionaires. And so there was a correlation, at least among public intellectuals, with their ability to make money and their influence. And so I thought, well, if I just force myself to make money, I'm going to have to be influential enough. It's not a perfect proxy at all, but it was better, in my view, than getting donations, at least for what I was doing. Because with the donations, you have the problem of your audience is the donor. You just have to convince him that you're going to try to help a third party. But I don't want to. But if I can convince you to give me money for the book, you're probably going to read the book, right? If I can convince her to give me money to give you a book, are you going to read the book? So that was another fundamental insight. And again, I didn't know how to make it work. But I had this set of ideas, and that conviction then led me to try a million different details of implementation and learn what I needed to learn. So then I learned marketing and I learned sales and storytelling. But that was all derivative of having this confidence in the insight. And I think businesses, one huge failing of businesses is they don't have that fundamental insight and they don't have the fundamental desire to do it, the passion behind the insight. So they just have their, quote, insight is, I should make a lot of money, or I should be, quote, successful. And that's not an insight. And it leads to a lot of pain. Yes?
How did you discover the methods, or can you give any tips to discover how you get a mental reset or altitude?
Pay $1,000 and learn transcendental meditation. It's funny because it's, well, I mean, I give you others. Jump in an ocean. That's a good one. Get a good night's sleep. Work out really hard. I mean, they're not, I think it's a matter of making, I think what I do differently is I notice what works best for me and I make it systematic. It's not like I have these, profound experiences that no one's ever had. It's just an issue of frequency. Like Seinfeld puts it as, he's the one who got me into meditation. He puts it as, you know how 3 days a year, he has brilliant wording, like, you know how 3 days a year you wake up and you just had the best night's sleep? He said, that's what it feels like after TM. You can control that. Like, you can control that. And it works really, really well. For whatever this is worth, I just want to make a point, because I have a pet peeve about people telling me I shouldn't have paid $1,000 to learn how to meditate or whatever it costs. Here's a fun thought experiment. And I don't know the full implications of this, but it's still fun. Ask yourself, how much, if I had to abandon a certain knowledge or tactic, how much would you have to pay me? So like, if you told me, Alex, I will give you $1 million and you can never meditate again, I would say, go yourself. Like 100%. So I'm not telling someone to charge me $1 million, but it's really relevant. Or like, no Brazilian shoes. It's like, no, there's no amount of money. There's none. Because why? Because the money serves a purpose, and at this point, those are unless you could show me something that could accomplish exactly what meditation can, but better and faster, yeah, I'll never do it again. Why would I do it? But this goes to the point about like what's worthwhile with your time and money and resources. Like, there are certain things that just have insane leverage, and if somebody you respect claims that they have that, it's worth trying. I remember a couple of years ago when I was writing Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, and I felt like I need 2 hours extra a day of mental energy. It was just so hard for me to do that thing. And in 6 months. And I just needed it, and I heard Seinfeld give this lecture about transcendental meditation. I wrote a post on Facebook, and I said, I don't remember the exact options, but basically, if you heard Jerry Seinfeld, if you watched this tape, what would you do? And like the options were, go immediately spend $1,000 on transcendental meditation, or say, like number 4 was, dismiss it as mysticism. And I asked, and which one do you think I took? And then one person said, well, one person who knew me said, you probably just went and did it. And whether you have $1,000 or not, or whatever that means to have $1,000 because you could borrow it, it's worth really having an attitude where if somebody you respect says something is really, really good, find a way to test that out, because usually testing things is not very expensive. And sometimes people were doing all this research and forever and spending hours researching it, and they could have like found some like crackpot to teach them or something for free. And I'm very big into having an experimental attitude into testing things, and anybody that I trust who has in life a system that works well for them, which I think Seinfeld does, like I want to rip off as much of that as possible. I'm very lazy in that way. Yes?
So right now with where CIP is at, what are the 3 most pressing challenges you're facing with it?
Right now with where CIP is at, what are the 3 most facing challenges? That is the only intimate question that anyone has asked. That's the only personal question anyone has asked. So what do I want to say about that? The thing is, the main thing I'm working on, I don't want to talk about, not because I don't like talking about it, but because I like talking about it too much. There's a problem of when you're working on something, getting other people excited about it instead of finishing the damn thing. And with the number 1 thing, that's what I need to do. So I want everyone here to put pressure on me to finish it. So I'm not going to get any satisfaction of getting you guys excited about something that I want done. So that's number one. Number two, which we are doing and doing very well, we're creating a course for the fossil fuel industry that's being first piloted on 10,000 employees at one company, and then we're going to sell it to the rest. So hiring a business development person, but essentially we have a chance of controlling the whole curriculum of the industry. And I mean, the course is really cool. It teaches you, if you've ever, there's a cool course we have now at energychampion.net called How to Talk to Anyone About Energy, which is really good for how to frame discussions. But this one is pretty crazy in terms of, as far as I can tell, like any way anyone attacks you or sets it up, it teaches you how to like funnel it into a good conversation. So I can talk about that approvingly because that's going well, and I'm on time. And then what's number three? Number three is just this is a really important business principle. It's like one of my favorite entrepreneur gurus, a guy named Eben Pagan, who's worth looking up on YouTube. He said, there are two things you want to do in your business. You need to run the operations really, keep running them really well, keep doing what works, and then basically drill for oil. So do growth things, like try these new experiments. But you always have to do the baseline thing really well. So right now, we're trying to create a course that could make us tens of millions of dollars a year and be a lot more effective than me speaking 50 or 60 times a year. But right now, the money comes in from me speaking 50 or 60 times a year, so we have to keep that machine going. And that's a discipline that I've gotten good at, which I was not good at before. But it's like you cannot replace your old business model until you've actually replaced it. And so the old business model is a lot of my time, more than I would like. Like, today I'm thinking about selling, like, which people can, and I do a lot of sales. But that's like the number one thing in the business is do not run out of money and keep it working. So those are the three challenges. The one I won't talk about, and the second one and the third one. Yes?
This sounds like it might be related, but in terms of choosing how to spend your time, you've got short-term deliverables on the one hand, you've got self-development on the other hand. Be curious to hear your insights into that.
Yeah, and this is a big life question, and so in terms of like what you're currently, what you call your current short-term deliverables and then longer-term stuff. Yeah, I think it just so much depends on the state of the career, at the point in your career and your life you're at. So, for instance, there's a really good guy named Dan Sullivan who I'd recommend just find his podcasts online. He runs something called Strategic Coach. He's also the biggest booster of the moral case for fossil fuels outside the industry, and I've gotten to know him really well. He's an amazing guy, has a lot of really helpful concepts in business and in life. And he's got a system where you divide up your days in a certain way. So you have what are called free days, which you do no work for 24 hours, no like chores. Then there are called focus days, where 80% of the time you do your highest value work, whatever that is. So if that's those deliverables, that's what it is. And then they're called buffer days, which is where you do your learning and your chores and everything else. And what he says is that at the beginning, that works really well for an entrepreneur who knows how to make money and has a working system. But at the beginning, they can't do that because they might have to work 300 days a year because they're in such chaos because they're figuring things out. Very consciously, so anyone who knows me personally knows, like, I'm very easy to access. I mean, I might not want to hang out with you, but like I'm hanging out with someone on the weekends. Like I spend quite a bit of free time, and I prioritize those things a lot. But that's where I am. When I was 31, that did not make any sense to do. I didn't have the bandwidth because I would have failed, and then I would have had to do something I didn't want to do. So my particular choice in life has always been to never do anything other than exactly what I want to do professionally, because I believe that just like a basketball player should be playing basketball from the time he's 20 or whatever, like I should never stop doing intellectual work. So I didn't work in software, but that had a price with it, right? It was like social price and other price, but I thought it was worth it. But by the same token, I knew I was not going to do that my entire life, so I don't do that now. Yes?
I just had a quick follow-up on a previous question, because I've recently been interested in meditation. Is that $1,000 for information that you couldn't otherwise have gotten, or was that training?
All right, just give it to me and I'll teach. No, it's transcendental meditation. They insist on there are a couple of different versions of it, but they insist on teaching you in person. And in my experience, that is very valuable. And I did not think it was valuable. Well, actually, I did try, before I paid my $1,000, I did read about it online and I tried it and I didn't get anything out of it. I'm like, all right, I'm not going to just try the wrong way forever and I want to know what the best way is. So I just manned up and took the class. And that was really valuable. So it's just one of those things that's better taught in person. If you really, there is the best ripoff of it, if you want, that's free online. Search YouTube for The Release Method. The Release Method of Meditation by a very, very smart guy named Brendan Burchard. Incredibly smart guy, incredibly smart marketer, one of the best in the world. He's a self-help guy. I think some of his stuff is good, some I don't think. But he's like a brilliant, brilliant marketer. And he basically just took TM and taught it with a different word in his own way. So I don't think that's as effective, but try that rather than doing nothing. Come on, more meditation questions. Now, anyone who hasn't asked a question? What's it? Oh, did you have one? Go ahead. Yeah.
So we talked about the 2080 and the difference between 464 and then like 1% 54. What's like a 1% book or like essay from Main Brand that you would did the?
Oh, there's a question. Best questions are the ones that I don't have a good answer to automatically. And there's a question of, I mean, I'd say Atlas Shrugged is itself the 1% in your life. So there's a sort of like, once you have a certain, because if it's just, if I take Ayn Rand and then I can only read this little sliver, what's the best? It's so systematic, I don't think it's, like there's such a thing as too small a percentage. In terms of what would I, so if I would think of it this way as, what's the essay or the point that is sort of most non-obvious and powerful for people who generally read her stuff? So in writing and, well, in communication, I'd say, if I had to say anything, if you just read Ayn Rand, I'd say take Objective Communication by Leonard Peikoff, so there's like three or four seminal courses by him. There's Understanding Objectivism, Objectivism Through Induction. But Objective Communication, now I'm a communicator, but that was a complete revelation to me in terms of how to really understand an audience's context and how to build a context using objectivist ideas. And then in that class, he's, I believe, at his absolute peak, not necessarily as a thinker, but as a teacher, because it's just after he was actively teaching. He had recently been teaching. He was lecturing on this. He was just finished Ominous Parallels. Ayn Rand was still alive. And he was like really, he's just so on fire. Like you listen to the way he answers questions, he's just so on. So there's a pleasure in that. And then also, he just has all these little great insights about the philosophy there. So yeah, one thing that you might not consume, that's a 151 type thing, I'd say is Objective Communication. After that, I think of the communication ones probably a little too much, but I think chapter 4 of The Art of Nonfiction, Applying Philosophy Without Preaching It, I'd say that's probably the best, because that has a perspective on objectivism in terms of what objectivism really is and isn't that is never discussed anywhere else. So I don't want to go into it all the way, and I can't explain it as well as there, and it's very small, so read it. But Applying Objectivism Without Preaching It she talks about what's the difference between like a Platonic approach to objectivism and an Aristotelian approach to objectivism. That's, yeah, amazing for communication and amazing for thinking. What time is it? All right, one or two more, and then we're done. And I mean, if I'm not a moron, I'll talk. Art of Nonfiction. All right, do we have any more, or are we done? Okay, last one.
So just a quick comment, question actually. Have you ever heard of Upa Yoga?
No.
So, I mean, the most common practice of yoga in the U.S. is, basically based on stretches and things like that, muscle strengthening. Well, the basis of that type of yoga is called Upa Yoga, and I mean, we can talk afterwards. Mm-hmm. Essentially, it's, I tried to practice this, and
I mean, only a couple days ago, my dad, he's been telling me, you know, for a long time, do this type of yoga. And I mean, it's things like simple neck stretches along with breathing, even just basic arm stretches that you don't think are really going to do much. But then after maybe spending 5 minutes, I just had this instantaneous moment of mental clarity. It was great. I suggest all of you check that out. Upa Yoga, there's free resources.
Okay, so send it to me, and I'll try it, because I try everything that's not. I ironically don't try hallucinogenic things, but never actually. But yeah, I've never been drunk, so that's how experimental I am, I guess. But yeah, send it to me, and if I like it, I'll post it on Facebook.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, well, this was really fun. Anyone wants to chat, come up. But thank you very much.